The morning sun always hit the east side of my property, just right, casting a golden glow across the rows of tomatoes, squash, and wildflowers that had become my sanctuary. I called it the line, a personal term I used to separate the life I lived before my wife passed and the life I built after. My garden wasn't just soil and seeds. It was memory, purpose, and something to wake up for. Every morning at 5:30, I'd open the valve to my custom irrigation system, a gravity-fed setup with smart timers and buried PVC lines I installed with my own hands. Watching the drip lines gently water each root zone was like seeing her smile again. When Rachel Bennett passed away 7 years ago from ovarian cancer, I didn't just lose a partner, I lost my sense of home. But this garden, with its blooming life and quiet demands, pulled me back one shovelful at a time. It gave structure to my grief. I mapped out every inch, composted with care, even built a shaded bench beneath the jacaranda tree where Rachel used to sit and hum old Willie Nelson songs. The irrigation system was my pride, not a drop wasted, no runoff, and entirely independent from city water. I used a deep well I'd drilled long ago, permitted legally before the HOA even existed. That part is important. Our neighborhood Edgefield Lakes didn't always have an HOA. When I bought the property 18 years ago, it was a loosely connected community with spacious yards, aging trees, and a rural-urban edge charm that reminded me of the hill country. But a few years after Rachel died, the newer residents, younger couples, retirees from out of state, voted to establish a formal homeowners association. They promised it would raise property values, standardize aesthetics, and ensure safety. I didn't vote for it, but I wasn't alarmed either. At first, they were all about trimming hedges, fixing potholes, and issuing friendly newsletters. But things changed quickly once Gretchen Moore became president. Gretchen was the kind of woman who carried a clipboard like it was a sword. She walked the neighborhood in pressed slacks, inspecting everything from mailbox height to holiday wreath colors. Her version of community spirit was conformity. Her pet project, making Edgefield Lakes look like one of those catalog neighborhoods you see in luxury real estate ads. Uniform mulch colors, HOA-approved paint palettes, even rules about lawn ornamentation. At first, she left me alone, probably because of my age or because I kept to myself, but eventually, her attention turned to my garden. It started subtly. A letter about non-conforming fencing, even though my picket fence had been there for over a decade. A second note about visible compost bins. Even though they were behind shrubs, I responded politely, citing that I was grandfathered in under previous property rights and that no changes had occurred since the HOA's creation. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. One morning, I found Gretchen standing outside my front gate, arms crossed, staring at my garden like it was a crime scene. She didn't wave, just pointed to a clipboard and said, "We've had some complaints." I asked her what kind of complaints. She muttered something about water usage, uneven landscaping, and the visual impact of agricultural installations. I reminded her that my irrigation system didn't even use city water. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "It's about community standards." I asked her to leave my property, and she did, but not before she said we'll be following up. Over the next 2 weeks, the letters came faster. One claimed my garden layout violated open space harmony. Another accused me of unauthorized utility modifications. None of it made sense. I'd built everything legally kept, records had permits, even my well was compliant with state water rights law. But it was clear now this wasn't about water. It was about control. Then came the unthinkable. I was away visiting my daughter Laura Bennett in Houston for her birthday weekend. When I returned Sunday evening, something felt off the moment I turned down my street. The birds weren't chirping in the same rhythm, and the air smelled faintly of disturbed earth. As I pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. The garden was silent. I rushed to the side yard where the control box for the irrigation system had been gone. Wires hanging out like ripped veins. I stepped further in. The ground was torn up. Sections of PVC pipe stacked like garbage near the compost. Mulch displaced roots exposed the moisture sensors ripped from the soil like they were weeds. The jacaranda bench had been moved. The ground around it was cracked and dry. The entire system, the one I had built with my wife's memory in mind, was destroyed. At first, I thought it was vandalism. But then I saw the folded paper in a plastic sleeve pinned to my front door. HOA. Notice of removal, unauthorized irrigation system. The signature at the bottom made my heart hammer. Gretchen Moore, President, Edgefield Lakes, HOA. The note claimed I had failed to respond to prior citations, and that under emergency landscaping rectification protocols, the HOA had the right to remove non-compliant installations in defense of communal integrity. I stood there for a long time. Not angry yet, just hollow. I didn't even know where to start. My first instinct was to call the police, but I knew how those things go. The HOA would claim they had given notice. It would be chalked up as a civil matter. I knew I had to play the long game. But one thing was certain. They didn't just dig up a garden. They woke up someone who knew how to fight back. The Monday morning after the destruction felt colder than usual, even though the forecast said otherwise. I stood at the edge of the trench where my garden used to thrive, feeling the dry breeze cut across the now barren plot. It was surreal, like waking up to find your living room furniture rearranged by strangers. I walked the perimeter slowly, my boots crunching the disturbed earth, spotting broken fittings, shattered drip heads, and clumps of dried-out soil. I returned to my porch note, still pinned to the door. I sat down in my rocking chair, put on my reading glasses, and studied every word like it was a battlefield map. The HOA had marked this as a removal action under Article 9.6 of the Community Compliance Code. That clause didn't exist in the version of the HOA charter I'd received when the association was formed. I pulled out my homeowner binder, a thick file of every permit, every diagram, even the original plat maps. Then I checked my email inbox. Nothing. Not a single message indicating any pending action. But then I found it. An envelope buried under a stack of grocery ads on my kitchen table, postmarked 10 days ago. A standard form letter from the HOA. Dear Mr. Bennett, it has come to our attention that your property contains a non-conforming irrigation system. Per HOA Regulation 7.3, all irrigation systems must comply with city standards and maintain visual uniformity with neighboring lots. You are hereby instructed to remove said system within 14 days of this notice to avoid HOA-initiated removal and associated costs. The date on the letter was more than 2 weeks old, but I had only just opened it. They sent it regular mail, no certified delivery, no email, no follow-up. And they had acted. I called the HOA office. It went to voicemail. I tried Gretchen's direct number listed on the HOA website, no answer. I didn't bother leaving a message. I'd seen this tactic before: act fast, remove resistance, then hide behind the bylaws. I spent the rest of the day photographing everything. I documented the destruction, zoomed in on cut wires, filmed the damaged pipe joints, and pulled out valves. I even found the trench where they disconnected the well pipe, a reckless move that could have contaminated the groundwater system. I uploaded everything to a secure folder. If they wanted a fight, I would give them evidence. That night, I sat down with a glass of sweet tea and started writing. My letter of formal complaint was concise, firm, and factual. I cited the date of my original irrigation permit, the date of HOA formation, and the clause in the state's homeowner protection statute that prohibited retroactive enforcement of landscaping rules. I attached copies of diagrams, photos of the destruction, and pointed out the illegal tampering with private water infrastructure. I requested full restoration within 30 days or a hearing with the HOA board as required under HOA Resolution Protocol 4.2. I printed 3 copies, mailed one to the HOA's legal address, one to their management company, and hand-delivered the last one myself. I walked right into the HOA office at the community center and, to no surprise, found it empty, but for the young receptionist. She looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I'm delivering a complaint. I want it time-stamped and signed, I said. She blinked, uncertain. Gretchen isn't in right now. I know. This is for the record. Can you sign for it? She hesitated, but eventually signed the receipt copy I'd brought. I thanked her politely and left. I knew how this game worked. I wasn't going to lose my temper. I wasn't going to yell or bang on any doors. I was going to document everything. Let them dig their own hole. 2 days later, I received an email from the HOA board, not Gretchen directly, but a generic address. It read, Mr. Bennett, thank you for your communication. The HOA maintains that the irrigation system was not in compliance with community guidelines. Per Section 7.3, we acted within our authority to enforce removal. You are welcome to present your case at the next HOA board meeting. Please submit your request to be added to the agenda by Friday at noon. No apology, no acknowledgement of damage, just bureaucratic stonewalling. Fine, I'd be there. But something was still bothering me. As I continued to clean up the damage and try to water what was left with handheld hoses, I couldn't help but notice something strange. The common area across the street, the green belt maintained by the HOA, was lush. Not just maintained, but thriving. During a dry spell when city ordinances restricted watering to 2 days a week, the green belt looked like a golf course. Thick Bermuda grass, colorful flowers, sprinklers misting in the early morning light. It didn't make sense. I asked my neighbor Shirley Thompson, a retired teacher who always had her ear to the ground. How's the HOA watering that space with the restrictions? She gave me a look. They say it's recycled rainwater, but I've seen the timers running at 4 a.m. almost every day. 4 a.m. was when the neighborhood was asleep, except for me. I made a habit the next few mornings to walk my dog quietly, flashlight off, near the greenbelt. And that's when I saw it. A man in an unmarked truck standing next to an underground valve box. He unlocked it with a key, made a few adjustments, then left. No logos on the truck, no uniform. I snapped a photo, not sure what I was looking at yet. Later that week, I spotted something even more curious. A small rusted pipe running from behind the green belt shed a maintenance structure no one ever seemed to enter that fed directly into the sprinkler system. I traced it back slowly, carefully, avoiding obvious detection. And that's when I found it. The pipe tapped into a city main line. But the connection wasn't marked. It wasn't listed on any of the utility maps I pulled from the city's online portal. Something was very wrong. Gretchen and the board had destroyed my irrigation system for unauthorized water use, while they may have been committing water fraud themselves, tapping into city lines illegally to keep their pet landscaping project alive. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, and I had just found my leverage. I didn't sleep the night I discovered the pipe. I lay in bed, eyes open in the dark, listening to the faint creaks of the old house and the rhythmic ticking of the ceiling fan overhead. My mind ran through scenarios: legal, tactical, personal. I'd been through combat zones. I'd been through grief. I knew what to do when you're staring down something bigger than you. You don't blink, you gather, you prepare. At dawn, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, grabbed my camera, and returned to the site. I brought measuring tape, a notepad, and a digital water pressure gauge I used during the initial install of my irrigation system. I recorded the direction and slope of the mystery pipe, photographed every valve, and noted the brand of irrigation controllers. Most were high-end industrial systems, far beyond what a residential community green space needed. When I popped open one of the control boxes, I saw something that made me sit back on my heels. The water meter inside wasn't a city-installed unit. It was a bypass, uncertified, rigged inline with no barcode, no serial number. I'd seen these during my deployment years ago, where black market siphoning was common. Someone had engineered this setup deliberately, likely years ago, and it had been feeding the HOA's greenbelt landscaping nonstop. I stepped back and laughed, not out of joy, but because the hypocrisy was so rich it was almost poetic. My well-fed drip system, compliant, legal, and environmentally sound, was destroyed. And yet here they were drawing unmetered water from the city illegally. I kept all my findings organized in a digital folder labeled Hydra. I wasn't ready to report anything just yet, not without understanding how deep the rot went. But I started keeping backup copies on external drives, uploading to the cloud daily, and encrypting the folder with a password only I knew. That Friday, I walked into the HOA meeting at the community center. I wore my old service jacket, not for theatrics, but because people pay attention when they see stripes. The meeting was already in session, with Gretchen presiding from a raised table flanked by 4 other board members. They had bottled water, matching polos, and a thick air of smug entitlement. She spotted me and offered a thin smile. Mr. Bennett, you've requested to address the board regarding your recent compliance violation. I said nothing as I approached the podium, laying down a file folder in front of me. Before I begin, I said calmly, I want it noted that this meeting is being recorded on both video and audio. I held up a small lapel mic and pointed toward the pocket-sized camera clipped to my shirt. As permitted, under Texas Open Meeting Act, since this is a public HOA meeting. Gretchen's smile stiffened. You may proceed. I began by reading a short, precise statement. I am here to contest the unauthorized destruction of my personal irrigation system installed under legal permit in 2013. Said destruction was carried out by the HOA on the basis of non-existent or misapplied regulations. Furthermore, I contend that the HOA has violated state water usage laws by illegally tapping into city infrastructure for the maintenance of the community greenbelt. You could have heard a pin drop. A man to Gretchen's right whispered something into her ear. She adjusted her microphone. Mr. Bennett, if you are making accusations, I must ask for documentation. I have it, I said. I pulled out a USB drive and placed it on the table. Photos, time-stamped video, pipe schematics, city water grid overlays, and a signed affidavit from a former maintenance subcontractor who says he was instructed to keep quiet about the back line. That last piece, I hadn't told anyone yet. I tracked down an old contractor listed on an HOA invoice 2 years back. He was the one who installed the irrigation system under the greenbelt. When I found him, he was reluctant, said he'd signed an NDA. But after I showed him photos of what was happening, he told me everything, off the record. Then he sent me a scanned note, an estimate he had submitted years ago titled Bypass Install Greenbelt Irrigation. Gretchen reached for the USB but hesitated. These are very serious accusations, Mr. Bennett. They are, I replied. Which is why, as of this morning, a preliminary report has also been submitted to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ. They'll be reviewing your greenbelt's water usage for the last 3 years. I believe you'll find the penalties for unauthorized city water diversion substantial. One of the board members cursed under his breath. Gretchen leaned back. You've gone too far. No, I said. You did. When you dug up my land without due process. When you destroyed a system that posed no harm simply because it didn't fit your aesthetic vision. When you tried to crush the one peaceful thing I had left. The audience behind me, mostly residents, shifted uncomfortably. I hadn't noticed how many people were there until that moment. I turned slightly and saw a few nods. Shirley Thompson was seated near the back. She gave me a thumbs up. I suggest I continued that the board suspend further actions against my property until the state completes its investigation. And if any further retaliation occurs, even a passive-aggressive newsletter, I'll escalate, legally, publicly. There was silence. Then, as if rehearsed, Gretchen gave a curt nod. Thank you for your remarks, Mr. Bennett. The board will take your concerns under advisement. I knew what that meant. Delay, deflect, hope I'd go away. But I wouldn't. I was just getting started. The next week, the TCEQ inspector came by my house. A woman named Carla Davis, early 40s, confident, gate clipboard always in hand. She introduced herself, showed credentials, and asked if I could walk her through what I'd found. I did methodically, calmly. We spent 2 hours tracing the illegal pipe. I showed her the makeshift meter, the bypass valve, and how the irrigation lines connected to unauthorized fixtures. She photographed everything, took notes, said she'd be requesting records from the city utility department. Looks like you've got them by the throat, she muttered. I don't want their throats, I replied. I just want my garden back. But I knew now that this wasn't just about the garden. It was about something deeper. The idea that people with just enough power and too little accountability will take more than they're allowed. And they'll keep taking until someone makes them stop. As Carla left, she turned to me and said, Mr. Bennett, just so you know, what they did to your well line, that could constitute felony tampering under state law. Especially if they didn't have a licensed plumber do it. I raised an eyebrow. You think that'll hold? She smiled. If the records show they never pulled a permit, oh, it'll hold. That night, I went to the back porch, opened a bottle of Rachel's favorite white wine, and sat under the stars. I lit a citronella candle, placed it on the empty patch of earth where the jacaranda bench used to sit, and let the breeze carry my thoughts. I wasn't just rebuilding a garden anymore. I was restoring something that should have never been taken. The days that followed blurred into a strange combination of calm focus and quiet fury. Every time I walked past my gutted garden, it was like someone had carved open a piece of my chest. The roots were dying literally and figuratively. The tomatoes wilted first, their leaves shriveling into brittle brown curls. Then the cucumbers followed. Even the lavender bushes, tough and resilient, like Rachel used to say, began to yellow and collapse inward. I did what I could with buckets and watering cans. But it wasn't enough. I wasn't just battling heat and time, I was battling sabotage. And sabotage, I'd learned in the military, was rarely random. A week after the HOA meeting, I received a letter from Gretchen. It wasn't on the standard HOA stationery. This one came in a pale blue envelope, scented faintly with lavender, a personal touch like she wanted to remind me who was in charge. The letter was short. Mr. Bennett, the board has decided not to pursue further action at this time. We hope you'll consider bringing your landscaping into visual alignment with community standards moving forward. Sincerely, Moore President, Edgefield Lakes HOA. No mention of restoration, no apology, just a smug dismissal wrapped in perfumed paper. That's when I stopped watering the dead plants. I let them die. Then I cleared them out, all of them. It took 3 full days, and I didn't stop until every root was pulled, every vine uprooted. I stacked the debris in neat piles along the edge of my yard. By the end of the 3rd day, the garden was nothing but dry soil and memories. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The final straw came the next morning when I opened my mailbox and found another HOA newsletter. This one celebrating community beautification success. Right there in glossy color was a full-page photo of the Greenbelt. Lush grass, blooming roses, a few kids flying kites in the background. The headline read, "How Smart Watering Practices Keep Edgefield Beautiful." My jaw clenched. I read the caption beneath the photo 3 times. Thanks to our environmentally conscious HOA board, the community green spaces remain vibrant despite city water restrictions. There was no mention of illegal piping. No hint that they'd tapped into a city line without authorization. Just polished propaganda dressed as civic pride. But something else caught my eye. At the bottom of the newsletter, in tiny italic print, was the name of the company that maintained the Greenbelt, Lakeside Landscaping Co. I hadn't noticed it before. That name rang a bell. I went to my desk and dug through the stack of receipts and invoices I'd collected during my early research. Sure enough, there it was. A payment slip from 2 years ago showing a monthly bill of $5,800 paid by the HOA to Lakeside Landscaping. That wasn't unusual in itself. What was unusual was the address listed for the company's registered agent. It was Gretchen Moore's personal residence. I blinked and blinked again. It had to be a mistake. Maybe she was just an officer or a silent investor. But when I searched the company name through the Secretary of State's online business registry, it was right there in black and white. Registered owner, Gretchen Elaine Moore. She owned the landscaping company. She had created the HOA's landscaping standards. She had ordered the destruction of my system. And she had personally profited from the illegal water siphoning that kept the Greenbelt green. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone. I called Carla Davis, the TCEQ investigator. When she answered, I spoke calmly but clearly. "Carla, I think you're going to want to expand your investigation." Within 48 hours, Carla returned to Edgefield Lakes with a second investigator, this time accompanied by a representative from the city's Utilities Compliance Office. They reviewed my files, took screenshots of the state business registry, and recorded interviews. I handed over everything, photos, invoices, the newsletter, even the old contractor's statement. "You know," Carla said as she skimmed the documents, "this goes beyond water theft. If the HOA president is funneling contracts to her own company, that's a conflict of interest. If she used her authority to eliminate competition like, say, your self-sufficient system, that's abuse of power, possibly fraud." That afternoon, the city issued an emergency cease and desist order against the HOA for unauthorized water access. The Greenbelt sprinklers went silent. The fountains at the clubhouse were turned off. Wedding rentals scheduled for the upcoming weekend were abruptly canceled, and the neighborhood began to buzz. It started with whispered conversations on the sidewalks. Then came the angry posts on the community app. People were furious not just at the water situation, but at the deception. Gretchen had billed herself as the neighborhood's moral compass, and now her halo was rusted and slipping. But I wasn't celebrating, not yet, because I knew something else was coming. That night, just before midnight, I heard gravel crunching near my side gate. I stepped out quietly, staying in the shadows, just as a figure retreated into a black SUV and drove off. I checked the gate. The latch had been jiggled but not broken. On the ground, a folded piece of paper had been wedged under a rock. No envelope this time. No perfume. Just a single line written in thick black marker. "You should have stayed quiet." I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. My mind went back to the surveillance cameras I'd installed 2 days prior, hidden in the eaves of the house, watching the driveway, the gate, and the back fence. I went inside and pulled up the footage. There she was. Not Gretchen, but someone I recognized from the HOA meetings, the treasurer Eleanor Cross. She'd always sat beside Gretchen, nodded at everything, and rarely spoke. She had delivered the note. I saved the footage to 3 separate drives. Then I emailed a copy to Carla. At dawn, I stood on the now empty plot of my garden. The earth was dry, but the sky hinted at rain. I took a deep breath, knelt down, and pressed my hand to the soil. There was still life here. It was time to begin again, not just for my land, but for the truth. And the truth was just starting to bloom. The silence in the greenbelt was the first thing I noticed. After the cease and desist order hit, it was as if someone had unplugged the whole neighborhood's heartbeat. For weeks, we'd all grown used to the quiet hiss of morning sprinklers and the soft hum of the maintenance crew's early morning blowers. But now, the fountain in front of the clubhouse sat still, the stone basin cracked with heat, and no longer veiled by the misty spray that used to greet every jogger at sunrise. The vibrant green that once blanketed the lawns began to wither under the weight of the sun. Grass yellowed, flower beds drooped. And as nature reclaimed what water fraud had propped up, residents started asking questions loudly. I'd never heard so much murmuring in the streets. Couples walking dogs paused to gossip. Golf carts stopped mid-roundabout as retirees leaned out to share theories. Shirley Thompson became something of a spokesperson for what people were calling the Bennett Rebellion. I told her not to call it that, but she just smiled and said, "You're giving folks backbone." But something still gnawed at me. Despite the exposure, despite the shutdown, Gretchen remained untouched. She hadn't spoken publicly. She hadn't resigned. And though the landscaping company was now under audit, I suspected she was regrouping, looking for a new angle, a new leverage point, which meant I couldn't relax. One morning, I received a knock at the door. Not Carla from the TCEQ this time, but a man in his early 50s, dressed in a clean button-down with a city utilities badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself as Luis Rangel from the Municipal Water Division. "I came because something doesn't add up," he said. "The HOA's usage logs show monthly readings, but they don't match the main line flow rates in this area. I think they've been manipulating the meter, data possibly backdating reports." "Could they have installed something like a bypass valve?" I asked. Luis nodded slowly. "Or worse, a ghost meter. You ever hear of one?" I hadn't. He explained in some rare cases. Bad actors installed duplicate meters. One real, one fake. The fake feeds into official reporting. The real one continues to draw water unrecorded. It's an old utility scam usually reserved for commercial farms or industrial parks. Never seen in residential HOAs. Until now. I offered to walk with him back to the greenbelt shed. When we arrived, he opened the rusted door and crouched beside the pipe manifold. He ran a series of tests using a handheld device, and after a few minutes, he stood up, face tight. "There's a second flow signature here," he muttered, "which means they were running 2 meters." I finished. He gave a low whistle. "This is going to blow up fast." Within days, a city-level investigation was formally opened. Luis submitted a full report, and a subpoena was issued for all HOA water records from the last 5 years. I didn't know exactly what they'd find, but I knew Gretchen's empire of green lawns and backdoor deals was teetering. That week, I began receiving anonymous tips in my mailbox. One letter was scrawled on lined paper, the handwriting shaky. She used HOA funds to pay herself. Landscaping was a cover. Check the invoices from June 2021. One, she billed twice for the same job. Another came via email from a burner account. It included a screenshot of a bank transaction showing a $14,200 deposit into a personal account labeled ELM Holdings. ELM. Elaine L. Moore. The fraud was deeper than water. It was financial, systemic, and well hidden until now. I packaged everything up and sent it to Carla and the city investigator. I didn't add commentary. The evidence spoke for itself. But that wasn't the end. One Thursday morning, I received a formal invitation hand-delivered to attend a special session of the HOA board called in response to community concerns. The meeting would be open to all residents. Shirley cornered me that afternoon with a mischievous gleam in her eye. "You gonna go?" "I have to," I said. "They're trying to get ahead of it." The meeting was packed. Dozens of residents filled the chairs and lined the back walls. Gretchen sat at the head of the board's table, her face composed but pale. Eleanor Cross was beside her, lips pursed, eyes flicking anxiously between attendees. A security guard stood at the door a first. Gretchen tapped her gavel and spoke. "We're here tonight to discuss the current investigation into the HOA's landscaping practices, recent disruptions to our greenbelt maintenance, and concerns raised by a handful of residents." The room murmured. A handful, someone scoffed from the back. "We understand emotions are high," she continued, "but we assure you all expenditures and procedures have been within the scope of our bylaws." That's when I stood. I wasn't planning to speak, but something in me surged. "May I address the board?" Gretchen hesitated. "This isn't a formal grievance hearing." "Then consider it a personal statement, one your neighbors want to hear." A few people clapped quietly. She couldn't deny me. I turned to the room. I didn't start this to pick a fight. I started it because someone took something from me without notice, without permission, and without remorse. That irrigation system wasn't just PVC and pressure valves. It was memory. It was peace. I paused. And then I discovered they were stealing water. Not just for aesthetics, but for profit. While citing me for using my own legal well, they tapped into a city line, rigged the meter, and funneled contracts into a company the board president owns. Gasps echoed across the room. I looked at Gretchen. "You destroyed something personal to protect something corrupt." She opened her mouth to respond, but the crowd erupted. "Is it true? Answer him. Where's the money, Gretchen?" She raised her hands, trying to restore order. The board called for recess, but it was too late. By morning, a petition had been circulated demanding the immediate suspension of Gretchen Moore and Eleanor Cross from the board pending audit results. Over 200 signatures were gathered in less than 48 hours. Residents who had never shown up to meetings before now stood in line to ask questions. The tide had turned, but even then I didn't celebrate, because I hadn't rebuilt the garden yet. Not until something had changed, not in the dirt, but in the soul of this neighborhood. That change was coming, and this time it wouldn't be watered by lies. 2 days after the explosive HOA meeting, a manila envelope showed up on my doorstep, slid under the storm door sometime in the early morning. No return address, no postage. Just my name handwritten in a sharp, impatient scrawl. I brought it inside, warily peeled the seal back, and emptied the contents onto my kitchen table. Inside were 12 pages of financial statements, internal HOA invoices, including payment histories, bank transfers, vendor contracts, and most damning of all, signed approvals. Each one had Gretchen Moore's name stamped or signed at the bottom. I didn't know who sent it, but they clearly had access to the inside. There were duplicates of landscaping invoices, the same job billed twice within the same billing cycle, same amount, but paid out of different HOA accounts. Irrigation maintenance, greenbelt renovation, emergency sprinkler repair. All vague, all coded, all totaling over $110,000 in a single year. One payment dated nearly 18 months prior stood out. Lakeside landscaping, $9 or $8.75. Emergency valve bypass install. That was it. Proof. Not only did Gretchen own the company getting paid, she had authorized the installation of the very bypass system, now under state investigation. I uploaded the files into my encrypted folder and sent copies to Carla Luis and the city attorney. I also sent a short note to a local journalist who'd been sniffing around since the first cease and desist order. I didn't name myself, but I gave them enough breadcrumbs. And then I grabbed my shovel. Not metaphorically, literally. The HOA may have torn up my irrigation system, but they'd missed a crucial detail. The main distribution pipe from my well didn't stop at the garden. It had an underground branch that ran toward the south fence, a backup I'd installed years ago when we had a summer drought so bad even the birds gave up. If I could access that branch, I could restore my garden without using a drop of city water, without needing HOA permission. Because according to my original property plat, that corner of the yard was entirely mine. outside HOA landscaping jurisdiction. A loophole in their uniformity clause so small it would only fit a man with a spade, a dream, and a grudge. So I dug. The earth was stubborn, sun-baked from weeks of heat, but I worked steadily mornings and late afternoons when the sun was tolerable and the air smelled like slow forgiveness. I unearthed the old PVC line, still intact, still viable. I cleaned it, replaced cracked joints, and resealed it with fresh primer and glue. Then I installed a new timer box, routed drip lines around fresh beds, and planted new seeds. Not everything from before, though. This wasn't about recreating the past. It was about reclaiming the present. I planted new rows, eggplant, kale, dwarf sunflowers, even a stretch of bluebonnets Rachel had always loved. I placed the jacaranda bench back under the shade. The moment I sat down, sweat-soaked and sore, I heard the gentle tick-tick-tick of the irrigation lines hissing back to life. It was subtle, but in that moment, it was louder than any applause. That same week, things escalated on the HOA front. Gretchen issued an emergency newsletter titled, "Clarifying the Narrative." In it, she claimed the water investigation was politically motivated, that her landscaping business had saved the HOA thousands, and that recent accusations from disgruntled residents were based on misinformation and personal vendettas. She made no direct mention of me, but I could feel her aiming every sentence at my door. Her mistake was attaching her name to it. Because within hours, copies of the envelope I'd received were being posted on Nextdoor Reddit, even taped to light poles around the neighborhood. The journalist I'd tipped off published an article in the Austin Ledger Garden War turns into Watergate HOA, under fire for alleged fraud. It went viral, at least locally. By that weekend, TV crews had shown up. I refused interviews at first. I wasn't chasing fame. But after I saw Gretchen speaking to a reporter in front of the clubhouse, spinning a tale about baseless accusations and ungrateful homeowners, I decided it was time. I agreed to one interview, just one. The reporter met me in the garden. We sat on the bench under the jacaranda, surrounded by new life, inching its way toward the sun. I told the story straight, not with anger, with truth. I didn't fight the HOA because I wanted to be right, I said. I fought them because what they did wasn't right. And when people in power think they can tear down someone's peace just because they think no one will stop them, that's when someone has to stand up. By Monday, everything was in motion. The City Council had launched a formal review of HOA oversight regulations. The TCEQ escalated their investigation from civil to criminal inquiry. Residents voted to suspend Gretchen and Eleanor from the board pending audit results. And Lakeside Landscaping, their business license was temporarily revoked pending review of fraudulent billing practices. But the most satisfying moment came on a quiet afternoon. No press, no cameras, when a man in a reflective vest showed up at my gate. He introduced himself as Dan Reyes, a city utility foreman. "I came to see the system you built," he said. "We read the article. Some of the guys were impressed. They said you made a gravity-fed drip layout that runs cleaner than half the city's systems." He asked if I'd be willing to share the plans. Not for prosecution, for inspiration. They were exploring models for sustainable water usage, and mine might be a fit for a community pilot program. I didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked out at the garden, my garden, where seedlings were beginning to stretch their arms toward the sky. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'd be honored. Sometimes you win with lawyers, sometimes with laws, and sometimes with the slow, patient drip of water across dry earth until life finds a way back." By now I knew the only path forward wasn't just in the soil beneath my feet. It was through the law, through accountability, through the slow gears of government that, when pushed by enough truth and pressure, could grind even the most arrogant tower of deceit into rubble. The problem was pushing those gears meant stepping into a different kind of battlefield. The day I placed the call to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality TCEQ whistleblower line, I was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm I hadn't felt since the last time I signed a deployment order. The woman on the line was professional. Her voice was flat but attentive, as though she'd heard every variation of chaos before breakfast. "Can you describe the nature of the violation, Mr. Bennett?" "Yes," I replied. "Unauthorized tapping into a city water line by a residential HOA, a bypass system feeding into common grounds, possibly fraudulent meter readings. I have photographs, piping diagrams, and financial documents that may show misappropriation of funds by the HOA president through a company she owns. There was a pause. Then she said, "We'll open a formal complaint file. You'll be issued a case number. Please upload any supporting documentation through the secure portal I'm emailing now. An investigator will be assigned within 72 hours. I already had everything zipped and ready, but I wasn't done. While TCEQ handled environmental violations, the financial misappropriation that was different. That's why I also submitted a tip to the Texas Attorney General's office under the Public Corruption Division. I worded it carefully. I wasn't accusing anyone publicly yet, but I named names, dates, amounts. I even included Gretchen's property deed. She'd used HOA funds to renovate the clubhouse, and yet suspiciously that same month, her home had a newly permitted outdoor kitchen installed. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. Within a week, I got my first response, Carla Davis again. She emailed with an update. "Mr. Bennett, your report has been verified. We've confirmed unauthorized water use by the HOA through a non-permitted connection. We're preparing an enforcement action which may include significant fines, mandatory system deconstruction, and possible referral for criminal investigation." I read the message twice. Then I closed my laptop and went outside. The sun was just starting to dip, painting the garden in that dusty gold light I always associated with late summer and forgiveness. I sat on the bench watching the new seedlings sway. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without anger. But the reprieve didn't last long. The next morning, a black SUV idled outside my house for over 20 minutes. No logo, no one got out. Eventually, it drove off, but the message was clear. I told Carla. 2 days later, someone slashed the hoses on my new irrigation lines. They didn't break in, didn't destroy the timer or controls, just cut the soft connectors between the main pipe and the beds, deliberate, subtle, and meant to look like nothing. A rodent, maybe. Or a random accident. But I knew better. I replaced them. Then, I set up motion-triggered lights and linked my cameras to a cloud backup and a neighbor's storage device just in case. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. Because I knew deep down that cornered animals lash out hardest when they see the net closing in. And Gretchen Moore was running out of places to hide. The neighborhood atmosphere shifted again. Not just whispers now, but questions asked out loud. A group of residents called a special town hall separate from the HOA to discuss community governance transparency. Over 60 people showed up. Some angry, some embarrassed, many just confused. I stood near the back, not wanting to hijack anything. But Shirley Thompson, bless her persistent soul, raised her voice and pointed at me. "Mr. Bennett should speak. He's the reason we're all seeing the truth now." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. So I stepped forward. "I don't need to be thanked," I said. "I didn't do this to be a hero. I did this because when someone digs up what you've built, looks you in the eye, and says they're allowed to, you have two choices: bow your head or stand up." I paused. I chose to stand. The room went silent. Then applause, not loud, but long. It wasn't for victory. It was for clarity. That night, as I reviewed the footage from my cameras, I spotted a figure near the green belt shed, one I didn't recognize. Not a resident. Younger, thinner, dressed in a city worker's vest. But something didn't add up. His badge was upside down. I screenshotted his face and ran it through a facial recognition app I'd used once in my service days. The kind that searches public data. No hits. Not a city employee. Probably a hired goon from one of Gretchen's maintenance contractors. I sent the image to Carla with a note, "Unknown individual. Possibly tampering with ongoing investigation site." She responded within the hour. "We'll escalate to the Attorney General's office. Please stay alert." By now, my house was more secure than most government buildings. But I wasn't afraid, because fear had long since burned out and hardened into something colder resolve. Still, not everything was about vigilance. There were beautiful moments, too. Like the morning I woke to find a handwritten card tucked into my screen door. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper with a child's drawing a cartoon tomato plant smiling. On the back, in blocky, uneven handwriting, "Thank you for standing up for our neighborhood. I hope your garden grows back. Maddie Carter, age 8. I wiped my eyes before the sun had time to, and I promised myself whatever the HOA tried next, whatever mud they flung or shadow they sent my way, I would finish this. Not for revenge, but for peace. For Rachel. For the soil beneath me and the voices behind me. Because when truth takes root, even concrete can crack. The first sign that things had reached a new level wasn't a phone call or an official letter. It was the convoy of white state vehicles rolling into Edgefield Lakes just after sunrise. 3 sedans and 1 marked enforcement truck from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They pulled up beside the community clubhouse and parked in plain view. Carla Davis stepped out first, clipboard in hand, her gaze sharp and unapologetic. A few neighbors came out onto their porches, still in robes and slippers, watching silently as the agents began taking measurements around the greenbelt and the clubhouse fountain. This wasn't a courtesy call anymore. This was a raid. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, not interfering. I didn't need to. Carla had it from here. By mid-morning, they had the maintenance shed open, the ground meters disassembled, and the unauthorized bypass valves removed. Luis Rangel from City Utilities arrived shortly after. He didn't look at me as he walked past, but I caught the faintest of nods, the kind of silent acknowledgement soldiers trade in battle zones. A nod that said, "You were right. They found everything." 2 ghost meters, 1 fake city valve, and even a backup line, buried deeper than the rest, likely a failsafe in case someone ever caught on. When the inspectors reached the irrigation control box behind the green belt sign, Carla called in a city code enforcement officer. The system had been jury-rigged to run on a closed circuit, unlicensed, unpermitted, and dangerously close to a high-voltage electrical grid. That alone was enough to shut down the entire site indefinitely. And then it got worse for them. Inside the maintenance shed, buried beneath a pile of old event banners, they found 4 large drums labeled gray water. But when the contents were tested, it wasn't reclaimed water, it was straight from the municipal supply. No filtration, no permits, no tax, just theft. By noon, a full report had been issued. The HOA was in violation of at least 6 state environmental codes and 3 municipal utility laws. A tentative fine had already been calculated upwards of $140,000 pending confirmation of usage over the past 3 years. That would bankrupt the HOA's reserve fund, and likely its leadership. I spent the afternoon tending to the new beds in my garden, letting the rhythm of planting quiet the noise. The sun was steady but not overbearing, and the soil was loosening after a gentle rain the night before. My tomato seedlings had taken root. The squash had sprouted tiny green fists of resistance. Life was returning. Around 4 p.m., I got a knock at the door. This time it wasn't a stranger. It was Eleanor Cross, former HOA treasurer and Gretchen's right hand. She looked tired, the makeup on her face drawn and patchy, her blouse wilted from the heat. Her eyes didn't meet mine immediately. "Can I speak with you?" she asked, voice hoarse. I hesitated, then nodded. We sat on the porch, not saying anything for a while. Then she spoke. I didn't know everything she began. I really didn't. Gretchen kept most of the invoices separate. Said they were expedited payments. I trusted her. I thought we were doing what was best for the neighborhood. "You signed the checks," I said, not unkindly. She nodded. "I know. That's on me." She pulled a manila folder from her bag, another one. Inside were 5 more contracts, all signed by Gretchen, showing direct payments from the HOA to LM Holdings, not even masked under Lakeside Landscaping anymore. She stopped hiding it after the 2nd year, Eleanor said quietly. Because no one ever questioned her. Not until you. I took the folder. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I don't want it to go down with her," she said, eyes now locking onto mine. "And because you didn't just save your garden, you saved the whole damn neighborhood." I didn't say anything. She stood, nodded once, and left. The next morning, the Austin Ledger ran the headline across its front page, HOA. Watergate president under investigation, facing $140K in fines and ethics probe. It was accompanied by a photo of Gretchen entering her home, face covered, flanked by 2 officials holding sealed documents. The fallout was swift. An emergency HOA meeting was held. Over 100 residents showed up. Gretchen didn't. Eleanor did, and she resigned publicly. The board dissolved itself that evening. A neighborhood vote was scheduled to elect an interim committee, one that would operate under full transparency, with third-party audits and community approval of every contract. For the first time in months, people smiled at each other in the street again. They waved, asked about gardens, traded stories about HOA infractions they'd endured silently for years. One woman told me she'd been fined for a hummingbird feeder out of color compliance. Another man said Gretchen had made him repaint his shed 3 times because it clashed with the seasonal palette. Truth had a way of unlocking years of buried resentment. But it also made room for healing. And healing in Edgefield Lakes was overdue. That weekend, a few neighbors knocked on my door and offered to help replant part of the garden I hadn't gotten to yet. One brought herbs, another a bag of tulip bulbs. Someone showed up with a potted lemon tree. Shirley even offered to install solar lights along the walkway. For dramatic effect, she said with a wink. We spent the afternoon working side by side, hands dirty laughter easy the scent of mulch and redemption thick in the air. When we finished, I stepped back and looked at the garden. It wasn't what it used to be. It was better, because this time it wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us. The fine came in at $147,600, officially issued by the TCEQ, with backing from the City Utilities Department and verified by 3 months' worth of flow data, meter bypass analysis, and contractor testimony. It wasn't negotiable. The HOA had 30 days to pay or risk lien placement on its collective assets, including the clubhouse, the greenbelt, and, in rare legal circumstances, pro rata assessments spread across homeowners. Word of that last clause spread like wildfire, and that's when the neighborhood truly turned. People who had once defended the board, the quiet loyalists, the ones who whispered things like, "It's probably just a misunderstanding," or "Gretchen means well," now stood openly in opposition. Because it wasn't just about water theft anymore. It was about their money. A petition began circulating not just to dissolve the current board, but to restructure the entire HOA charter. I signed it without hesitation. Within a week, over 85% of homeowners had signed. The pressure hit its boiling point on a muggy Tuesday afternoon when a local news van parked in front of Gretchen's house. A reporter knocked. No answer. Neighbors stood on porches, arms folded, watching the silent fortress she'd barricaded herself inside. That evening, Gretchen finally emerged. She walked onto her porch and read a prepared statement to the cameras. No questions taken. I categorically deny all allegations of wrongdoing. I have served this community with integrity and transparency. The current accusations are politically motivated and stem from personal vendettas by a few individuals with grudges against the HOA's mission. I have no further comment at this time. She didn't mention the water lines, or the invoices, or the $147 or $600 fine. But the damage was done. That night, someone spray-painted $147K, "It was your legacy" on the HOA community sign. No one admitted to it, but no one painted over it either. The City Council held an emergency, open forum 2 days later. Carla Davis from TCEQ was there, along with Luis Rangel and 2 members of the State Environmental Compliance Board. I sat quietly near the back, hands folded in my lap, listening as they fielded questions. A young mother raised her hand and asked, "How could something like this happen for 3 years without anyone noticing?" Luis answered honestly, "Because it was designed not to be noticed, until someone forced us to look." Dozens of heads turned toward me. I wasn't seeking praise, but it found me anyway. The mayor's office issued a formal thank you letter for my role in exposing the fraud. It wasn't grand, just a printed letter in a manila envelope, but it carried weight. Carla emailed me personally, too. "We've rarely seen a civilian gather such a meticulous, well-documented case. You did your part. Now we'll do ours." The HOA's bank accounts were frozen. Payments to Gretchen's landscaping company were suspended. The IRS opened a preliminary review. And the contractor, who'd originally confessed to the valve bypass, he agreed to testify. But through all of it, I kept working in the garden. I refused to let the chaos uproot the calm I'd started to regrow. Each morning, I'd check the seedlings, adjust the timer, sip coffee from the same old mug with a faded Marine Corps logo on the side. I wasn't trying to make a statement anymore. I was just living. And that seemed to be statement enough. Neighbors began to visit more often, not to talk about the drama, but to ask how I got my eggplants so full, my cucumbers so crisp, my soil so rich. I began keeping extra seed packets on hand, offering starter plants, even helping a couple down the street design their first raised bed. Someone suggested I start a gardening club. I laughed, but the next week, 3 families showed up with gloves and shovels ready to learn. We named it Backyard Rebellion. Every Saturday morning, we'd meet, plant something new, share soil stories and snacks. What started as a trickle became a tradition. Kids came too. Even Maddie Carter, the little girl who'd left me the tomato drawing, helped paint signs for the new community plots we were building in what used to be the HOA's ornamental zone. We turned the old ornamental rose beds, once kept pristine for optics, and HOA brochures into functional vegetable gardens. Tomatoes, chard, basil, cherry peppers. We ran new drip lines off a collective tank I installed with donated parts. The new interim HOA board not only approved it, they funded it. With what was left of the emergency budget, they bought gardening tools and compost bins. They even asked me to lead a workshop during the spring fair. I accepted, not because I wanted a title I didn't, but because Rachel would have loved it. On the first day of the fair, I stood under a canvas canopy with my hands in soil surrounded by neighbors' laughter and the scent of marigolds and mint. I wasn't just rebuilding land, I was rebuilding trust. Gretchen, meanwhile, remained locked in her house. Her name had been removed from all HOA documents. Lakeside Landscaping was officially dissolved. A warrant had been issued for her to appear in court for financial misconduct and water tampering. She would be held accountable. Eventually, but I didn't need to see it. I didn't need her downfall to validate my own standing. I had mine. Right here in this dirt, these roots, these people. The fallout hadn't scorched us. It had cleared the brush. And now, the garden was growing stronger than ever. Spring arrived slower than usual that year. Like it too had been waiting to see how the storm would end before it fully bloomed. But when it came boldly mornings, thick with birdsong evenings, soft with lavender air, and a steady parade of green pushing through the thawed soil. It felt like the neighborhood was breathing again. And for the first time in years I could too. The final hearing for the HOA water fraud case was held at the Travis County Courthouse. I wasn't required to attend, but I did anyway. Not out of vengeance that had long burned away, but because closure matters. Gretchen sat across the courtroom in a gray pantsuit, no clipboard in hand this time. Her hair was pulled tight, her expression carefully neutral. But she didn't look like the woman who once ruled Edgefield Lakes from the shade of the clubhouse. She looked like someone who had finally run out of shadows. When the judge read the judgment guilty of financial misconduct, environmental code violation, and abuse of HOA authority, she flinched only once. The sentence wasn't jail time. It rarely is in cases like these. But the restitution order was steep, and the civic penalty was worse, barred from holding any HOA civic or community office for 10 years. She left the courthouse alone. No reporters followed. No neighbors offered her a ride home. The community had already moved on. That weekend, I returned to the spot in my backyard where the old cabin used to stand. It was Rachel's favorite place tucked beneath the old cottonwood tree that split sunlight into perfect apples of gold and silver. The original structure had been simple, just enough room for a chair, a window, and a few quiet thoughts. When it was torn down, it had felt like a final theft. But now, standing there again, plans in hand, I was ready to rebuild. I didn't copy the old design. I let it evolve. This new cabin had broader windows, a deeper bench beneath the bay glass, and a small potbelly stove for cold nights. I built it over 2 weeks with help from neighbors, one of them an architect, another a carpenter. They offered to lend their skills for free. When I asked why, they just said, "It's time someone built something for you." On the last day of construction, Maddie Carter came by with her father. She carried a small plaque she'd made in school. It was wooden, painted crookedly in bright acrylics. It read, "Mr. Bennett's Peace Garden Where Truth Grows." I mounted it above the cabin door. The first time I stepped inside, the sunlight poured through the new window, like a benediction. I sat in the chair I'd rescued from storage, opened the window, and listened to the breeze, to the bees, to the sounds of a place that had reclaimed its own peace. I didn't need HOA approval. I didn't need permission. What I had now was more than legality. It was legitimacy, and it was earned. As spring turned into early summer, the neighborhood transformed. The new HOA board operated with full transparency, budgets posted publicly, decisions made collectively. They installed rainwater catchments instead of underground taps, created grants for sustainable gardening, and even renamed the Greenbelt. They called it Redemption Park. They asked me to cut the ribbon. I said yes, but I brought the entire gardening club with me. We stood together as neighbors, not as subjects to authority, but as stewards of a shared space we had fought for, bled for, and eventually healed for. In my speech, I didn't talk about Gretchen. I didn't talk about fines or courtrooms or raids. I talked about dirt, about how it remembers. How, no matter how much concrete or politics you pour over it, it always waits patient ancient for someone brave enough to dig again. I finished with this. I once thought justice looked like punishment, but I've learned it's quieter than that. It looks like a child planting her first seed. It sounds like laughter where silence used to live. It feels like walking through your own gate without fear, knowing this place is finally yours again, because you stood when it counted. People cried. So did I. Now, when people ask about the fight, the one that started with a destroyed irrigation system and ended with an entire neighborhood reborn, I don't tell them about the fines, the fraud, or even the court. I take them to the garden. I show them the tomatoes, the squash, the towering sunflowers. And if they have time, I invite them into the new cabin, pour them a glass of tea, and tell them the only part of the story that matters now, that you can lose everything, your peace, your place, your quiet, and still grow back stronger. That truth, when rooted deep, will always outlast the weeds. That justice isn't a courtroom. It's a garden, and mine is just getting started.